We hope you enjoy the following video presentation sponsored by the C.S. Lewis Foundation. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to equip and encourage Christians to live their faith within the world of ideas and arts. To help us continue to host events and make videos like this one, please make a donation after viewing the video by going to www.cslewis.org or clicking the link below. Thank you.
Well, I want to tell you a little bit about my story, but before I get into it, let me just read a few opening remarks. It's a pleasure to be with you. I have to say that at least one of the reasons that I was introduced to this community was a total fluke. Phil Kagi, you guys know Phil Kagi, the guitar player, one of the great guitar players, a friend of mine, one of the great guitar players of all time. He texted me one day and he told me that he had just read a book about the Inklings and that the author, a woman named Diana Glyer, had mentioned me in the book. So of course I was flattered, and I decided that this Glyer person must be brilliant. Not long after, I was playing a show at Wheaton, and I visited the Marion Wade Center, and I spotted Dr. Glyer's book, The Company They Keep. I picked it up, probably mentioning to the cashier in an offhand way that I was mentioned in her book. I read the book over the next few days, quivering with excitement at the turn of every page for the moment when I would discover my name. It never happened. I am nowhere in the book. I read it 5 or 6 more times just to be sure. But the book was wonderful. Diana confirmed something that I had suspected for years, which is that the downplaying of the influence of the Inklings on one another's writings was incorrect. Several books and articles I had read claimed that whatever influence that band of friends had on one another was negligible. But having lived in Nashville for 20 years told me another story altogether. My wife and I moved to Nashville in 1997, fresh out of college, and I got an apartment with her without really knowing anyone there. I did what every songwriter does when they first move to Nashville, which is I got a job waiting tables at the Olive Garden. It's not even a joke. Like, I remember the first week we moved in, I got the job because we just needed the money. I didn't have any gigs yet, and I think every other waiter at the Olive Garden had a trunk full of their CDs as well that they were trying to sell. So it was a little bit discouraging. But after getting a record deal and touring for several years, I began to realize that the greatest benefit of living in Music City, USA was the community. It was the deep friendships that I had found among friends who had found themselves following a similar calling. It was the profound encouragement that I received and was sometimes able to give by virtue of the mere vicinity of other songwriters who were familiar with the particular emotional and spiritual struggles that come with the job. I cannot overstate what a tremendous augmentation of my own gifting came through the community of fellow writers in Nashville. So when I read passing comments in Inkling studies claiming that they would have been just as productive with or without one another, it didn't ring true. So Diana Glyer's wonderful book upended those claims and demonstrated the true gift of creative community. I found myself again and again saying, yes. The Rabbit Room just for those of you guys who have asked about it, it is a nonprofit ministry that I started 10 years ago because of a fateful trip to Oxford. It was my first visit, and of course I went to the Eagle and Child, like all the other Americans apparently. I don't know if you've noticed, but there are very few British accents in that pub. Anyway, I saw a sign over the doorway that led into the little nook in the back that said Rabbit Room. And I asked the bartender why it was called that, and he said, oh, it was probably because rabbits had been kept back there about 200 years ago. I don't know if that's true or not. I realized in that room that day that the Inklings could not have been just a stuffy bunch of dons holding forth. They had to have been friends. And if they were friends, it meant that they laughed together. And if they shared such an important part of their lives, then surely that community had shaped their craft. I saw a correlation between their fellowship and the one that I had found in Nashville. So without meaning to, we were emulating what the Inklings were doing. Of course you know how Lewis was the first true nerdy fan of the Lord of the Rings, how he encouraged Tolkien by his sheer enthusiasm for the work, when sometimes Tolkien wondered if he would ever finish, and if anyone would ever care if he did. That was a sentiment that I was familiar with. I had felt it, and so had my friends. There were many times when I felt like giving up, when no one would really notice if I cashed in my chips and just quit. But that community of fellow songwriters in Nashville called me back to my calling. They looked me in the eye and said, the world needs your songs. Not only that, we need your songs. I had occasion to return the favor many times. I came back to the States after that trip to Oxford and bought the domain name rabbitroom.com with the sense that there was something beautiful to be done with it. So after 10 years, I'm happy to report that the Rabbit Room has had over 2,000 pieces written by various writers, 8 years of a sold-out conference, countless concerts, and Rabbit Room Press has published more than 20 books, including 2 new ones from Walter Wangren Jr., who asked the Rabbit Room to steward his legacy. The best thing about the Rabbit Room, however, is not the works that we produced. It's the deepening of the friendships. It's the community. It's the marriages, literally. We've had, I think, 4 marriages, thanks to people who have met at Hutchmoot, which is our Rabbit Room conference. People have started to call it Hutch Match, or Hitchmoot was the other name for it. So if you're single, please come to Nashville, and maybe we can get you straightened out. Our mission statement is this: the Rabbit Room fosters spiritual formation and Christ-centered community through story, art, and music. The Rabbit Room fosters spiritual formation and Christ-centered community through story, art, and music. I just lost my place, hold on. Oh, we believe that art nourishes community and community nourishes art. That's one of the things that we say all the time. Art nourishes community, community nourishes art, which is to say that writing, singing, creating tends to gather people, and it enriches community, like it did with the Inklings. But that community, in turn, nourishes the art. It's a symbiotic relationship. So just to finish that story about Diana Glyer, she was at the Oxford half of this, right? Was she here? Okay, so she's awesome. So to finish the story about Diana, I met Andrew Lazo here for the first time this weekend, and he told me that he used to road manage for Phil Keaggy. Maybe you'll see where this is going. And Lazo is the Andrew mentioned in Diana's book, and Phil mistakenly texted me. And so we come full circle. All roads lead to Oxbridge, it seems. Yeah, I was so happy. Andrew came up to me and told me that a few minutes ago, or a few minutes after I got here, and I was just completely geeked out that the Lord seemed to have brought all of this together. And I'm very thankful that because of Phil Keaggy's mistake, I have a new friend in Diana. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about is calling. Obviously, that's the theme of the weekend, and I was considering what I might want to say to you, and realized that I had already figured all of this out just a few weeks ago, because my oldest son graduated from high school, and I was invited to be the commencement speaker for his graduating class. And the thrust of my talk to this group of high schoolers was calling. And I thought, well, you guys are not in high school necessarily, but the more I read it and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that these are principles that I hope will be a blessing to you as we kind of wrap up the weekend, and you can carry some of these ideas with you. So I went in and tweaked it and aged it up just a little bit, but not too much, just so you know. And I thought I would just kind of read the commencement speech as you commence from Oxbridge this year. So let me dig into this thing, and then we'll take some questions. I don't remember a lot about high school, but I definitely remember the feeling of high school. And the feeling I remember was a combination of aimlessness, restlessness, and recklessness. I was sort of a class clown. I know that's hard to believe, but the truth is, all that goofiness was a disguise, hiding the fact that I was a young man with a lot of fear. Fear that I would never do anything worthwhile, that I was a waste of space, that I would fail at life as badly as I failed at algebra. You guys are all smarty pants C.S. Lewis scholars, so you may not know what I'm talking about, but then again, maybe you do. I went to a public high school in North Florida. It was the county high school for the smallest county in the state of Florida, and I think we had about 90 people in my graduating class. That's right, 90 seniors in the entire county. I was often up to no good, nothing malicious most of the time. Mostly it was just knuckle-headed, blabber-mouthing, squirming in my seat kind of stuff. In our town, the teachers were allowed to spank you with a wooden paddle, no joke, all the way up to high school. And we called them swats, or licks. One week, I got a lick each day by different teachers, mainly, that's true. It was in 8th grade. I got a lick every day of the week from a teacher. It was horrible. Anyway, mainly for not keeping my mouth shut. The rest of my mischief was just dumb class clown kind of stuff. For example, sometimes when the teacher wasn't looking, I would hide all the hall passes in weird places in the classroom. Only after they had ordered new ones would the old ones be found. One time in Spanish class, I scooted my desk about 1/8 of an inch backwards every 30 seconds or so that by the end of the class, I was against the back wall without the teacher noticing. It was in that same class that I crept around like a spy and collected all the girls' purses and put them in a cabinet without their noticing. I remember, I'm a pastor's kid, did I mention that part? I remember staring at my pencil and trying to use the force to get it to roll. I can't believe I'm telling you this. My crowning achievement, however, was that when they would announce over the intercom that certain clubs were to be excused to the library for yearbook or newspaper pictures, I would go whether or not I was in the club. I would just get up and leave as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Most of the time, my friends who were actually club members were in on it. In one of the pictures in the yearbook, I'm hiding under the table, and you can just see one of my eyes peeking out from behind a chair leg. But word got around, and some kids in the Super Brainy Club, or whatever it was called, were understandably miffed that a D student was trying to sneak into their photo, and they tattled on me. The librarian, Mrs. Swapelthorpe, I just made that name up because I couldn't remember her name, shooed me out of the library with a lot of angry librarian words. Not so easily defeated, I sprinted down the hall, out the doors of the school, ran around to the windows of the library, and stood on the windowsill with my hands in the air. To my great delight, when the Union County Times came out the next Thursday, the county paper only ran on Thursdays, I discovered with a triumphant pride that I was faintly visible in the background as a blurry figure over Wade Howell's left shoulder. Take that, Mrs. Swapelthorpe. Believe it or not, I'm telling you all that for a reason. I want to talk about what it means to live with meaning. I don't recommend any of the aforementioned tomfoolery. Part of that stuff was born of my sinful nature, true, but part of it was that the education system I was a part of didn't know what to do with kids like me. Understand, this isn't me bemoaning the teachers or the administration of my school. They were wonderful and they did their best for the most part, and the truth is I could have done better in that system if I had only applied myself. In fact, that's what all my teachers wrote in my yearbook. You'll do fine in life if only you'll apply yourself. I was in the gifted program for a while in elementary school. You guys know the gifted program? I was so proud of having been in the gifted program until about 10 years ago I found out that actually meant that I had a learning disability. They trick you, they make you feel special. So I was in the gifted program for a while in elementary school. My grades were bad. I was pretty weird. They probably saw me trying to use the force on my pencil. And they thought that I would do better in a class where I was learning French. It didn't take. Je n'ai pas François, je ne sais quoi, oui, oui, monsieur Paris Eiffel Tower. All through high school, I was playing music, drawing pictures, reading books, and failing tests. I wasn't dumb, but I felt dumb. I felt like there was something wrong with me that wasn't wrong with everybody else. Most of all, I felt a dark and unsettling aimlessness, especially my senior year, because it seemed like everyone else had a plan. Either they were going to community college or to University of Florida, or they were working for their parents, or they already had a job. All I had was this guitar, this dream of music coupled with a debilitating disbelief that I could ever do it for a living, because, after all, I was from the smallest county in Florida and graduated by the skin of my teeth. After graduation, I worked at the local grocery store, feeling about as aimless and hopeless as you can imagine. It's a long story, but I ended up joining a rock band that toured the exotic reaches of the world in Wisconsin. I remember I got home when the band broke up. I came back home to Lake Butler, Florida, and all my hair was long, and I felt like I was just a world traveler because I'd been to Wisconsin. And my friends were like, "What was it like there?" I was like, "It's amazing, you guys. Wisconsin is like amazing." There's not much in Wisconsin. It's beautiful, but don't get me wrong. So my time in that rock band was an odd mixture of utter misery and fun. And when the band broke up, I was back home with that same lack of purpose, that same awful fear that I would turn out to be as bad at life as I was at French. Oui, oui, mon frère. Then something happened that changed everything. Picture me with long hair. I'm skinny as a rail. I'm 19. I'm sitting at a grand piano in an empty church auditorium in Jacksonville, Florida, at about midnight. I'm trying to learn how to play a song by some guy named Rich Mullins. And the best way I know how to describe what happened is this. God reached through that song I was learning, reached deep into the dark caverns of my aimless, empty heart, and turned on a light switch. Suddenly I knew, in a way I had never known before, that God was real. Really, really real. All the stories I had learned, all the Bible verses I had memorized, all the sermons my dad had preached, all the nights at youth group, all the prayers before meals, all of it seemed to drip with purpose, with meaning. It suddenly mattered. I had the feeling that my whole life had been one long wandering in a dark forest, and I had stepped into a lovely, sunlit clearing. And in that clearing, a table had been set, and on that table was a little card with my name on it. Can you believe what I'm telling you? I'm not a religious fanatic. I'm not crazy. I'm a grown man whose life was undeniably altered in a definable way. I had been given a life, a beating heart, lungs that expanded automatically, a mind, a mouth to speak, but had no idea what to do with any of it. And then I did. It was that simple. As best as I can tell, that's what we in the church talk about as calling. We say, I've been called to the mission field. I've been called to preach. The word vocation is really a Christian word. According to the interwebs, it comes from Old French or from Latin vocatio, from vocare, to call. Webster's first definition of vocation calls it a divine call to a religious life. I'm here to tell you today that each of us has a divine call. You may not have heard it yet, or perhaps you've heard it but you haven't responded. I don't know how it all works. All I know is there was a moment when my relationship with God was pretty questionable. And then there was a moment, thanks to a Rich Mullins lyric, when I not only believed, with a depth of reality that I'd never yet known, that there was indeed a great mystery in the world, and that he had leaned in close to get my attention. But I also saw a path stretching out before me that every cell in my being wanted to follow. Not long after that moment, I said to God, whatever gifts you've given me, I give back to you. Use them for your kingdom and your glory however you want. If I can write songs and tell stories and wake others up the way that I was just awoken, then if it's your will, that's what I want to do. A few weeks later, literally, to my shock, I was no longer in a rock band, but was starting my freshman year of Bible college. My dad almost fainted. I met my wife, Jamie, the first week of school. We were married a year later. I recorded my first EP in my junior year. I moved to Nashville right after I graduated. I got a record deal. Then I wrote some books and got published. So on and so forth, s'il vous plaît. You see, all my gifts were dead in the water until the Holy Spirit breathed life into their sails. The whole of my life took on meaning when I could no longer ignore the giver of that life. Look, I don't know what you believe deep down. Maybe you're starting to think that you don't buy all this Christian stuff. Maybe you've said that out loud. Maybe it's a terrible secret. And then again, maybe you're a Christian and you've never been plagued by doubts. If so, that's wonderful. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but you're going to struggle sooner or later, and that's not a bad thing. But I want you to know, moms, dads, grandparents, siblings, students, and graduates, and C.S. Lewis Foundation Oxbridge attendees, the stories are true. I believe it because, to be honest, I've seen too much beauty, too much goodness, too many kind and luminous souls whose lives would make no sense if the gospel weren't true. My life wouldn't make sense if the gospel weren't true. That acquiescence, that admission of defeat, that soul surrender, that moment at the piano in the dark church hall when my bones were warmed by the presence of God, when my heart was healed by his forgiveness, when my cheeks were wet with tears of gratitude, none of that would make sense if the stories weren't true. It wasn't a delusion. I sincerely believe that I'm not a good enough songwriter or singer or author to have found any success apart from the intervention and blessing of God. I know what a doofus I am. There are better singers, better writers, but God be praised, he multiplied what little I had and led me into that bright clearing where the table was set. I can't explain it any other way. Each of you has a calling. Each of you has been given gifts. So here's what you do. 3 things. First, you listen for the call. It may not be as dramatic and definable as mine was, though to be honest, mine didn't feel terribly dramatic at the time. I was just sitting at a piano and then I went home. That's it. But in hindsight, I see that as the moment when it all changed. Just listen. Don't ask yourself what your dreams are. Dreams, at least the way the word is used these days, are fickle things. They'll change, they'll die, they're often more about your ambition than anything else. Forget your dreams. Ask God to show you what He wants you to do. What is His dream for you? Lay your ambition on His altar. I promise you, whatever He has in mind for you is far better than anything you could come up with on your own. But the beautifully subversive thing is that what He wants is what you want. You just don't know it yet. If you lay your life down, you'll find it. Look at your gifting. Ask yourself what it would look like if you used those gifts to build your own kingdom. And then ask yourself what it would look like to use those gifts to build God's kingdom. The thing is, you're always building a kingdom, either your own or God's. Your job is to live out the Lord's Prayer with your talents. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Let His will be done in you, with you, now on earth, just as it is in heaven, where Christ is seated at the right hand of the Father. If you can't hear the call, if you've been asking God over and over to show you what to do, then you listen to your community. Michael Card told me once that your community defines your calling. I'll say that again. Your community defines your calling. That means all you have to do is look around at the people God has put in your path and find a way to lay down your life for them. Easy, right? It also means that your community, your friends, your family, your church can probably see your gifting better than you can. So listen to them. Ask older, wiser people to speak into your calling. Frederick Buechner, one of my favorite writers, wrote that the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And you're going to need help understanding what that thing is. So listen for the call and let your community define your calling. Second, let that calling guide your decisions and don't waver. Once you've heard that call, all hell will try to distract you from it. Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art. Has anybody read The War of Art? We talked about this in one of Lancia's sessions. It's a great little book. It articulates this by calling it The Resistance, with a capital R. The book is a wonderful little explosion of motivation. Pressfield is not a Christian, but he believes that there is a force in the world that wants to shut you up. I'll say that again. He believes that there is a force in the world that wants to shut you up. If you have been given a gift, have been called to write a book, for instance, Pressfield says that there seems to be an opposing force that wants to keep you from writing that book. That's resistance. Have you ever noticed, he says, that the day you finally clear your calendar and sit down to write the story you've always wanted to write, friends and family you haven't spoken to for years will suddenly feel the urge to call you on the phone? That's resistance. Remember that there is such a thing as spiritual warfare, and your gift is the bright sword you swing in that dark battle. Don't be surprised if it fights back. Pressfield calls it resistance because he has no name for that opposing force, but we do. And if you want to read about it, there's a book called The Screwtape Letters. We need you to keep fighting. Keep using that gift to build God's kingdom, to love the weak, to add beauty to the world, to encourage your brothers and sisters in Christ, to proclaim along with the heavens the glory of God. Eugene Peterson wrote a book called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. You guys, anybody read that book? I'm just curious. Wonderful book. You almost don't need to read the book. You just need to internalize the title, which he got from Nietzsche, of all places. That is the life that I want to live. It's the life that I want us to live. That's what calling looks like, a long obedience in the same direction. A few years ago, I was doing one of those gigs, nothing like Monday night, let me promise you, where the audience was unresponsive and really tough. I had just broken my leg, and I had to do the gig from a chair with my big medical boot propped up. I was tired from having done too many shows. I missed my family. I was wondering what in the world I was doing with my life. And that was before the audience proved to be a tough one. After 20 years of playing music, it can get a little discouraging when you're asked to play at a banquet or something, where you get the feeling that everyone is more interested in the cheesecake. Those gigs pay really well, but they're seldom worth it. By the way, one of my favorite Lewis quotes, which I now use to get out of playing those banquets, is that he said one time that music during dinner is an insult to the musician and the cook. Pretty great. Anyway, I looked out at that audience that night, and the voice in my head said, "You're pathetic. 20 years and you're still just a dude with a guitar telling your stories to the same size crowds." After the show, I was sitting in a wheelchair with my leg propped up, feeling about as lousy as a broken-legged musician can feel, drowning my sorrows with a slice of someone's cheesecake. A man about my age came up to me and said, "20 years ago, I saw you play at Wheaton College with a band called Caedmon's Call. I loved your music back then, but I lost track of you. I just want to encourage you to keep going. I love the fact that after 20 years, you're still just a dude with a guitar telling your stories." I wept. I wept into my cheesecake. This, after all, was exactly what I had asked for. And God, in His graciousness, gave it to me. It was my job, and it still is, to be obedient. The life that stretches out before you will be richest, most beautiful, most rewarding, if you think of it that way. Most of us won't change the world in big, earth-shattering ways like C.S. Lewis. We'll change it quietly, lovingly, like the long obedience of a growing garden. Whatever that calling is, keep at it. But then what happens when a door is shut? Do you knock it down, or do you change tactics? It's so hard to tell. Well, I think if it's the Lord, then that community I talked about earlier will help you to know it. And if they're affirming your gifting and your calling, then you should kick down that door like a SWAT team on a mission. You may suffer, but suffering is no gauge for whether or not you're on the right path. The path of the Christian is marked with suffering. Just look at Jesus, who was perfectly obedient to the Father's calling, and it led him to betrayal and death and resurrection. And the empty tomb was anything but a closed door. So heed the call and don't waver. Finally, the third point is remember to recalibrate your compass. James K. Smith, in his book Desiring the Kingdom, another book I'm curious if anybody's read, great book, right? Please go read this book. Wonderful. And he writes about how humans, I'll just give you the basic thesis of the book, Desiring the Kingdom. He basically says that, for years and years people thought that the thing that made humans human was the fact that we were rational creatures, that we were primarily rational thinking creatures. And that's what differentiated us from the rest of creation. And then, in the history of thinking, whatever, people said, no, actually, it's not just what you think that shapes who you are. It's what you believe. What you believe shapes your life. It's like that's your worldview, and the lens you see the world through, that's what shapes the direction of your life. And James K. Smith argues in his book that that's actually not true either, that there's deeper down than thinking or believing is desiring. He says we are fundamentally desiring creatures, and our ability to desire the right things in the right way was broken at the fall. And so our compasses are always swinging wildly, desiring all of the wrong things, looking for love in all the wrong places, if you will. We were made for communion and fellowship with God, but we are constantly forgetting that simple fact. Chesterton said that every man who ever walked into a brothel was looking for God. It's like there's a compass that points our hearts to Christ, the true object of our desire, but it gets knocked out of whack every day, and we need something to recalibrate it. I guarantee that someday soon you are going to either doubt God's existence or His goodness. There's a lot of talk these days about doubt, as if it's cool somehow to be a doubting Christian. Or, and I hate this phrase, to be an agnostic Christian. Having doubts doesn't make you special. Everybody doubts. Everybody. We do it all the time. Every time we sin, it could be argued that we've stopped believing in God. I doubt the existence or the goodness of God 50 times a day. It would be debilitating, not to mention foolish, to pay more attention to those 50 moments of doubt than to the faces of my children, or the affection of my wife, or the cool of the birdsong morning, or the wild and mysterious presence of music and art in the world, or the vast and compelling story of the Bible, a book unlike anything else in the world. Don't be surprised when your compass spins out of control. That's why we go to church. That's part of why we receive communion. That's why we read the Bible. That's why we pay attention to art and literature and film, which is good and beautiful and true. That's why we don't forsake the fellowship of the saints, which is not just church on Sunday, but is also coffee with friends and conversation about the gospel and feeding the poor. Every time we engage with those things, our compass is nudged back into place. And by the grace of God, we might actually manage, for mere seconds sometimes, to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind. We're going to fall off the wagon again and again, of course, but his mercies are new every single morning, world without end. So that's it. Listen for the call. Don't give up. Recalibrate your compass. I have wanted to quit more times than I care to admit. C'est la vie. The life that God has given me has been rich beyond measure, and yet it has also had its share of real gut-wrenching pain. My dad was a pastor for 50 years. He just retired and is still driving around Florida doing fill-in stuff. When I was in high school, I remember seeing how stressed he was, how heavy was the burden he had to carry as the preacher in a small-town church with all its politics and frustrations. I asked him back then if he ever thought about hanging it all up. He said it was hard, sure, but that he wouldn't trade it for anything. The fulfillment and gratification and great honor of serving our good King far outweighed whatever trouble came with the territory. That is calling. And now that I'm 42, I feel the exact same way. Though it's been more difficult than I have time to tell you, I will go to my grave singing God's praises for calling me into his service. The enemy will try to recruit you. And he won't do it by trying to get you to join his team. He'll just try to get you to quit God's. It amounts to the same thing. He'll woo you away from the kingdom. The culture will challenge you, make you feel like a fool, make you feel uncool. You'll be confronted with a million reasons to hang it up. At the end of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, by the way. At the end of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the corrupt minister of magic has been trying to recruit Harry to abandon Dumbledore's army. And Harry tells him at the end, in this awesome moment, I'm Dumbledore's man through and through. As you step out into the world, know that there is an enemy. Know that every day an epic battle is raging between light and darkness, truth and falsehood, your own kingdom and the Lord's. Have the courage to look the enemy in the eye and say that you belong to the good King. You're his man, his woman, through and through. His fight is your fight. His victory is your victory. That is your calling. King David, the great songwriter, wrote about calling better than I ever could. One generation shall commend your works to another, and shall declare your mighty acts. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works I will meditate. They shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They shall pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness, and I shall sing aloud of your righteousness. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and all your saints shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to the children of man your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord, and let all flesh bless his holy name forever and ever. This, my friends, is what we were made for. This is our calling. Amen. Thanks.